What if I told you that a warrior in the inner circle of Japan's great unifier, Oda Nobunaga, wasn't Japanese at all? What if I told you he was African? This is a story that challenges one of the most persistent myths about Japan. The idea of a nation that has always been perfectly ethnically uniform. For centuries, a narrative of a homogenous Japan has been presented to the world. But that narrative is incomplete. While it's true that Japan has often had less immigration than other parts of the world, the idea that its society was a monolith is simply a fiction. Indigenous groups like the Ainu and Ryukyuan people have deep, complex histories on the islands. But today we're exploring a thread that connects the archipelago of Japan to the continent of Africa. And this isn't a story from the 20th century. This goes back nearly 500 years to a time of civil war, Jesuit missionaries, and a global trade that would forever change the world. This is the story of Japan's forgotten African connections. The arrival of the Black Giant. Our story begins in the late 1500s during the chaotic Warring States period, or Sengoku. Japan was fractured, with warlords called daimyo all fighting for control. Into this turmoil sailed the first Europeans, the Portuguese. They arrived on massive ships the Japanese called carracks, filled with exotic goods, new technologies like firearms, and a mission to spread Christianity. The Japanese called them the Nanban, the Southern Barbarians. These ships didn't just carry Europeans, they had global crews with sailors from across Asia, India, and, crucially for our story, Africa. The first documented arrivals of Africans in Japan were in the 1570s and 80s, brought by the Portuguese, often as servants, sailors, or enslaved workers. But the Japanese reaction wasn't what you might expect. Instead of the prejudice seen in Europe, early Japanese accounts show curiosity and wonder. These men were often noted for their physical strength and imposing presence. In 1579, a high-ranking Jesuit inspector named Alessandro Valignano arrived, and with him was a man who would become a legend. We don't know his original name. The Japanese would call him Yasuke. Historical accounts describe Yasuke as exceptionally tall and powerful, towering over the average Japanese man of that time. He was said to have skin like black ink and the strength of 10 men. When Valignano's party arrived in the capital, Kyoto, in 1581, Yasuke's presence caused an absolute sensation. The Shinchokoki, the official chronicle of Lord Nobunaga, tells of a near riot as people scrambled to get a look at this black page. People were climbing over each other just for a glimpse, and the chaos caught the attention of the most powerful man in Japan, Oda Nobunaga. Nobunaga was a brilliant, ruthless, and intensely curious ruler on the verge of unifying the country. He was fascinated by the outside world, and when he heard about Yasuke, he demanded a meeting. At first, Nobunaga was skeptical and thought the man's dark skin was just ink. He ordered Yasuke to be stripped and washed. But as attendants scrubbed, Nobunaga realized this was no trick. The man's appearance was real. Nobunaga was captivated. He reportedly found Yasuke intelligent and interesting to talk to. The warlord was so impressed that he hosted a feast in Yasuke's honor. Soon after, he did something unprecedented. He took the African man into his service. From retainer to warrior. Yasuke's life was about to change dramatically. He was no longer just an attendant to a foreign missionary. He was now in the service of the most powerful man in Japan. Nobunaga brought Yasuke into his retinue, a position of great trust. This wasn't merely symbolic. Yasuke became an armed retainer and weapon bearer, a constant presence at Nobunaga's side. He was given a residence, a stipend, and most importantly, a ceremonial katana. The sword was a powerful symbol of his new status. While modern scholars debate if Yasuke was granted the formal rank of samurai, as primary sources don't mention a surname or a fiefdom, his role is undeniable. Being gifted a sword and serving a lord in this way placed him within the warrior class of Sengoku Japan. Yasuke's exact origins are unknown. A 17th century Jesuit account suggested he came from Mozambique, but this isn't corroborated by earlier sources. More recent theories from historians suggest he may have been from what is now South Sudan or Ethiopia, partly because people from those regions, like the Dinka, are known for their exceptional height. For now, his birthplace remains a mystery. Some modern popular histories say Yasuke fought for Nobunaga in specific campaigns like the Battle of Tenmokuzan in 1582, but primary documents don't explicitly place him there. His presence is more clearly documented in the events that followed, events that would shatter Nobunaga's ambitions. In June of 1582, Nobunaga was staying at Honnoji Temple in Kyoto with a small group of guards which included Yasuke. One of his own generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, betrayed him. In the dead of night, Akechi's army surrounded the temple and attacked. Facing certain defeat, Nobunaga committed seppuku, the ritual suicide of a warrior. What happened next is a plausible reconstruction, though not all of it is confirmed by 16th century sources. It's believed that Yasuke was there, fighting for his lord. After Nobunaga's death, it's thought that Yasuke escaped the burning temple and rushed to join Nobunaga's heir, Oda Nobunaga. He fought alongside Nobutada's forces, but they too were overwhelmed. Yasuke was eventually captured and presented to the traitor, Akechi Mitsuhide. A famous story which isn't found in contemporary sources claims Akechi dismissed Yasuke, calling him an animal who didn't understand reason and therefore should be returned to the Europeans. Whether this conversation happened or not, the result was the same. Yasuke was handed back to the Jesuits. From that point on, the historical record of this remarkable warrior falls silent. We don't know what happened to him. His story, though brief, is powerful and undeniable proof of an African presence right beside the most powerful figure in Japan. But he wasn't the only one. If Yasuke's story could be so easily sidelined, what other connections have we missed? Beyond Yasuke, uncovering other traces. While Yasuke is the most famous example, he wasn't alone. As Japan moved into the Edo period, starting in 1603, traces of an African presence continued to appear. Under the new Tokugawa shogunate, Japan adopted a policy of sakoku, or national isolation. For over 200 years, foreign contact was severely restricted. But the port city of Nagasaki remained a small window to the world, allowing limited trade, mostly with the Dutch and Chinese. Through this window, people of African descent continued to appear. Some scholars point to court records from Nagasaki that seem to refer to individuals of African descent, though the interpretation of these records and the specific terms used, like kurombo, is still a matter of academic discussion. Perhaps more revealing is the art of the era. If you look closely at Nanban art, screens and scrolls showing the arrival of Europeans, you'll often see dark-skinned figures. They're depicted as sailors, servants, or musicians. Some art historians interpret their prominent placement in these paintings, sometimes as armed guards or attendants close to powerful figures, as a sign of their recognized role in the social landscape. While this art doesn't prove widespread integration, it does suggest the image of an African in a position of service or trust was a familiar motif. There are other intriguing anecdotes. One account from the missionary Louis Froist describes an instance where, with no Japanese gunners available, a cannon was loaded by an African and fired by a South Asian with great effect. Another story, though based on very thin secondary evidence, suggests that the warlord Toyotomi Hideyoshi enjoyed a performance of a kafra dance by entertainers. These stories, though sometimes hard to confirm, help paint a picture of a pre-modern Japan where African skills were present and sometimes valued. From Yasuke's life to the figures in Edo period art, the evidence points to a small but persistent African presence woven into Japanese life for centuries. The deeper, debated past. The documented arrival of Africans in the 16th century is supported by solid historical evidence, but some researchers have proposed theories that push this timeline back much further into ancient history. Writers like the historian Runako Rashidi have argued for an African presence in Japan thousands of years ago, often pointing to Japan's prehistoric Jomon period, artistic depictions, or supposed connections to the indigenous Ainu people. These theories are highly speculative and are not accepted by mainstream archaeologists or historians. They currently lack the archaeological or genetic proof needed to be considered established fact. The evidence for these ancient connections is far more interpretive than the clear documentation of Africans arriving with European traders. So why mention them? because they are part of a wider effort to re-examine history and challenge old narratives. While we must stay grounded in verifiable evidence, it's worth acknowledging the full scope of the conversation. For now, the strongest evidence places the arrival of Africans in the 16th century. But the questions about what might have come before remind us how much of human history is still being uncovered. The story of a Japan that was always isolated and homogenous is a compelling one, but it's not the whole story. The historical record tells a more complicated and far more interesting tale. It tells us of Yasuke, an African man who became an armed retainer for Japan's great unifier. It shows us artwork where dark-skinned figures stand as guards and attendants, and it reveals records and anecdotes that confirm a continuous, though often overlooked, presence. This history wasn't erased by some grand conspiracy. It's more likely these stories were simply marginalized, seen as footnotes in a national narrative that prioritized a story of singular identity. But to ignore this history is to miss the truth. This overlooked chapter proves that the African presence in Japan is not a recent phenomenon, a product of modern globalization. It has precedents reaching back nearly 500 years. The fact that a man like Yasuke could be integrated into the warrior class of the 16th century provides a powerful foundation for modern conversations about diversity in Japan today. For Black Japanese people, this history is a vital affirmation that their roots in the nation's story may be deeper than many have been taught. This isn't a story of African roots in the sense of a massive ancestral foundation for the entire Japanese population. It's the story of a significant and surprising African presence, an overlooked thread that adds incredible richness to the tapestry of Japanese history. It's a story that reminds us that no nation's history is a monolith, and that the truth is always more fascinating than the myth. What part of Yasuke's story or the broader African presence in Japan surprised you the most? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.